Hello and welcome to Shooting the Shit. You will notice an absence today. Rachel is not with us, hence the sensible hello.
You should try again.
Doing the hello. You are, Dolly?
You should try again. Wasn't good enough.
Okay, here we go. Let's start again. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to Shooting the Shit. Today, we found a man to come and talk with us. We were looking for someone who was charismatic and dynamic, but in the end, we had to plump for Dali. So here we are. So today we are talking about working fathers. So we talk a lot about women in the workplace and mothers in the workplace, and we thought today we'd have a talk about what it's like to be a father in the workplace and whether or not the playing field is equal for them, how COVID might have impacted that, and the influence men in the workplace have on their own children. So Dali has a child and he is in the workplace. So Dali, you want to tell us a bit about yourself? What Rachel would say, what's your name and where do you come from?
My name is Simon Dali. I'm one of the directors at Grow Traffic. I'm a working father as well, so I think this talk is probably quite relevant to me, hopefully. Might be able to give you some insight. Who knows, I might not have thought about it enough.
And you've got one nearly 11-year-old boy, haven't you?
One 11 well, he's 10 now, he's 11 on Saturday. Yeah, so that's fun. He's a bit like a teenager already, has been a bit like a teenager for years.
About 11 years, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, it's good fun.
Marisha, what's your name and where'd you come from?
The name's Marisha.
Where'd you come from?
I come from Leicester. And yeah, I'm here to bring no insight into being a man. Although, you know, after a few drinkies, I do sound a little bit manly, especially the day after. But no, I guess, my kind of take on this will be, having a father, you know, that goes out to work and this, that and the other, because we, you know, have that impacts, doesn't it, you know, in some way, shape or form. So, yeah, let's roll.
And I'm Hannah. I'm a director of Grow Traffic, and I'm not a father, but I have a father who sometimes worked, and and I have kids, obviously. So, first question then. First question. Tell me about Dali. Tell me about your father going out to work. Did he work? Did he have an impact on your kind of view of work?
I suppose so. Yeah, my dad was. So my dad was a site manager in a construction company. Generally, all he did through that time, he was a joiner by trade. So he started working when he was probably 15, 16, something like that. Worked his way up to be a foreman, site manager. I think he, you know, later in his career, he went back to being a kind of a foreman again, or but all the time he kind of worked on the tools, as they put it in that kind of industry. He was, you know, up at kind of 5:30 in the morning every morning, quite often out at that time in the morning, depending on where he had to go. Generally, he picked. He normally had a works van, if you like, from whatever company he worked for. And whilst in the olden days, back in the 80s and probably early 90s as well, they used to put in the back of the vans. They used to put wooden benches in the back of the tradesmen's vans, and the foreman used to go and pick up all the workmen and put them in the back. You know, which was probably horrendously dangerous.
My dad used to drive with us in the back of his van, take us to the bookies, sit us outside the bookies, and then he'd take us home again an hour later.
So yeah, those useful pens.
He'd get up really early. He'd go and pick up all his men, take them to the site. He was back relatively early. So they in the construction industry, building trade, they started early and finished quite early as well. So he was around for kind of always back by 5, 5:30, that type of thing. But you know, he'd be back, and my mum would be cooking dinner ready for him, and it'd be, you know, we'd all sit down and eat when he got home.
And did your mother work?
Yes. I think for the first couple of years that I was growing up, she didn't. And then my brother is a couple of years younger than me, and she worked for her cousin, I think a cousin, distant related, but let's just call her a cousin. And they kind of built up a little nursery business. Well, they built it up together, but my mum's cousin was the kind of owner of the business. But it meant that she was around a lot. My mum was, she'd take us to school. She would be there when we were getting back from school, near us, damn it. And yeah, so she was around a lot more. My mum's also very kind of community orientated as well. So the role that she had was great because it meant that she was still quite a kind of central part of that village life that we had over in Exton. But it was very traditional. My dad went out to work from, like I say, from early in the morning, got back when it was dark most days. My mum was around more to look after the kids.
Okay, what about you, Rish?
Kind of similar, actually, similar sounding. So my dad is a welder by trade. So he was also very much in the camp of, up at the crack of dawn, literally, to get out and go to work, do his thing and get back when it gets dark, I guess, really. That's kind of my memory. I'm sure my mum would have something to say about all of this. But in my brain, that's what happens. He got up, and started his day before we'd even got out of bed, I guess, really, to crack on. And, I guess the kind of view was that it was almost we could go into this, and I'm sure we would. There was dad that was doing the work, out all hours. Mum worked as well. She did bits and bobs, but she was primarily the looker after of the children. So she was around more often. And, it was very much a case of, dad goes out, does the providing, and mum looks after home life, really.
Yeah,
So,
see, my
There was
house.
a huge. Sorry, I was just going to say, in my background, there's a huge disparity as well between the income kind of the two, my two parents earn separately, and it affected the kind of dynamics of their relationship and it was a sort of tension and things like that. And I don't know whether you experienced that as well.
Why, who earned more? Where was the tension?
My dad earned significantly more, like multiples more.
Right. So in my house, both my parents worked, and my mother was probably the breadwinner for the majority of time. And I don't really recall there ever being any there was loads of tension, but not about that, I don't think. They divorced when I was about 8, and then my dad didn't particularly work that much after that, but my mother has always, worked really hard and always kind of had multiple things on the go and earned the money. So, but then, do you think that having your parents in those traditional roles influenced your work ethic or your own view of your role in the family, Marisha?
I think that's a really good question, actually, because I think it does. At face value, first off, does it play, a kind of role? I think yes, it does. And but I also think that times are very different now, and we don't always have those same kind of dynamics. I want to have a baby and be married by I'm 20, and be looked after for the rest of my life. That was never in my plan, never in my head. So I kind of, sometimes work against that, in as much as the almost a feeling. It doesn't even need to be said, but almost a feeling that you should be this by now, you should be that by now, and why haven't you got a man to look after you? It's that kind of vibe.
I mean, it's not unsaid in a way. I think it's said indirectly, and I think it's probably said to both genders. Like, you need to be married by now. You should be earning this amount by now. You should be living in this sort of house by now. You should be at this point in your career. I think that's just a societal expectation on both people. And I think there is, like, going back to what Dali was saying about the tension between the kind of breadwinner and the not breadwinner, salad winner, I don't know, bread loser. in the
That's a shit job.
Sandwich maker.
sandwich maker. That's good. The breadwinner and the sandwich maker. That is literally what it means, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know what my point was then. Yeah, maybe that was a source of tension. Sally, do you think those traditional roles influence your kind of position in the family unit?
Yes, I think that. I mean, I think you're a fool if you think that your primary and secondary socialization hasn't had a big impact on you. You know, I think I've been lucky to grow up in the era that I did. Like Marisha said, times have changed. You know, I've been educated to a certain point where, you know, I want to be equal with my partner. I want to, you know, I expect to have that level of equality, and want to facilitate that. But you find yourself falling back into certain gender stereotypical roles over time, and you don't realize it until those habits have been set down for X amount of time, and you kind of look back at it and think, oh, you know, this has happened, and I don't know why, because it's never happened before, and it's something that I've always never wanted to happen. So, and I think there's a lot of factors that come into play. Some of them are systemic. Some of them are about socialization of me and, you know, my wife, and you know, there's lots of different things, expectations of society. Yeah, so yeah, I think it happens.
I think over time you fought very hard against your kind of instinctive patriarchal ways. I think, like, I've seen you consciously fight against that, like, natural inkling towards patriarchal roles and traditional roles.
Yeah, I definitely have my brother and I sometimes joke that our upbringing was a bit more of a indoctrination than an upbringing, if that makes sense. And sometimes I do think that some things come out of me that aren't rationalized, that I don't necessarily know where they come from. They don't necessarily make sense to the way that I think about the world and see the world. It happens.
It's interesting as well, though, like about Marisha saying she fights against those kind of traditional roles, because whilst my mother and father are out at work, Rachel and I were brought up by my nan, and she, you know, she was a ward sister. She was the youngest ward sister at Preston Hospital. And as soon as she got married, she left her job, gave up her career, put her life to raising the kids, as you know, women did. And so she stayed at home and looked after the home, and our papa went out to work. So we saw those traditional roles every day, and they were kind of counteracted by a more contemporary kind of equal footing of our parents. And I think, like, because of that, Rachel and I have become really kind of like actively fighting against traditional roles, and not like accepting that that's the way it is. Like, we see it as something that's quite old-fashioned now, rather than it being something that kind of embedded into our psyche.
I think it's interesting though, with your mum as well, because I mean, she was incredibly intelligent. You know, she could go and do whatever she wanted to, and she, you know, she had an advantage over a lot of you know, other people, and she was, you know, she was probably more naturally gifted than a lot of people, and your dad, and you could probably achieve more in that way. So I think I think that perhaps your kind of immediate familial background in that respect was different than the makeup of. And she was able to do it. You know, she was a grammar school child. She, you know, she had all those advantages. She was probably 20 years ahead, maybe 30, you know, of where a lot of other women were at that point.
Probably. Which is funny, because my papa was not in any way a feminist. In fact, I would say he was borderline chauvinist. That's interesting. Anyway, we don't need to talk about my in-depth family history.
I think it's just on that topic there. I think actually that what I'm thinking there is, you know, I think we have the luxury, if you like, for maybe want of a better term, of having lots of different influences. So yes, you know, there's the immediate, you know, from a family perspective, but because it has been changing over time, you know, we're in that kind of move, if you like, to equality. There's lots to do, obviously. That's a sweeping generalisation, as we always like to make. But you know, we have elements of other people, you know, like friends' parents, for example. They may not fit the model. Grandparents, for example. So you know, in that kind of space, I spent a lot of time with my maternal grandparents, and my granddad had retired by this kind of time, you know, put a lot of time and effort into the army and the police, and he was retired. So he was around, whereas my nan was still working for a time and a few years afterwards. So things, yeah, you know, and you look at other people's parents and form opinions about what happens there too. And so there's lots of influence, I guess, really.
I think there probably is a class issue as well, really, as to whether or not parents and grandparents work. Not everyone could afford to have one partner stay at home all the time. And like, even, you know, when my grandparents were bringing up their children, not everyone could afford for the mother to not work. So I think that is part of it as well. This whole fathers in the workplace, like we've said before, not every father wants to go out to work. Like not every woman wants to have a child and stay at home and look after it. Some fathers would rather stay at home. Sally, in the last 3 years, you've gone from working full-time in Manchester to working from home full-time at Grow Traffic. What's that been like as a father for you?
So let's think. So like we were saying before, Leon is 11 on Saturday, and I've always been out. You know, ever since he was born, really. I was working in Manchester. Was I working in Manchester when he was born? Yes, I was. I was working in Manchester when he was born, so I was leaving the house at, you know, like 6:20 in the morning, getting back at maybe 7 o'clock at night, and really that's been pretty much the pattern of my working life until about 2-3 years ago, really, until 2.5 years ago. And so it was only then that was the first time I'd ever walked him to and from school. The first time I ever walked him to and from school was back then, and you know, I was able to do that for days. It meant that I was able to actually build a half decent relationship with him, because I mean, I was always kind of in senior marketing roles as well, so I was quite often stressed out and I was drained, and I was, you know, I was.
What are you now?
Better.
Chill.
Still messed up from all that, but not as bad as I was, and you know, much more capable of much more, I would say, involved and around. One of the things that, so I worked in Manchester, which meant that I was an hour and a quarter. I had an hour and a quarter's commute away from being at home. So quite often, all of the household decision making was completely removed from me. I had, you know, no involvement in it. Or very little involvement in it. Little involvement in how Leon's life was progressing, because I wasn't available to make the decisions that, you know, or to help influence the decisions. And when I was getting home at that time, quite often I wasn't in a fit mindset to really sit down and engage with the family in that respect anyway. You know, I've been out for 13 hours that day. And you know, after doing that for all that time, I think when you get back to it, you kind of recognize that. But similarly, that we're very fortunate that Grow Traffic has grown, you know, with the work of everyone's put into it, has grown to the point where I was able to come back to Grow Traffic full time, and I was able to, you know, I'm able to experience all these things, because otherwise, let's be honest, I'd probably still be in Manchester in one of those roles, and I don't know, I probably still. my relationship with Leon had deteriorated quite a bit by then. So it's definitely improved it, I would say.
Yeah, like Naya, and now obviously Aubrey. I think Naya has a more open relationship with me than she does Dave, perhaps because pre-lockdown, Dave was working, out the house at 7:30 and back in at 6 o'clock. And while he's very much present when he is here, often he wasn't here. So I think it just those kind of few hours when the kid comes home from school or the walk to school, you kind of bond an awful lot with them, don't you? And if you're not available or you're not able to be there, then the bonding naturally happens with the parent who is the main caregiver, which in the majority of circumstances is the mother.
And I think not just the actual parenting side of it, but the kind of mental burden of looking after a home, looking after a child. It naturally just gravitates towards the person that is there. I'm sure it's a proximity thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Naya will do it a lot. Like if Dave is there and I'm there, Naya will come to me for something that Dave is perfectly capable of doing. Even like, do you think Dad would do this? Or do you think Dad wants to do this? Like, but he sat there, ask him. Like, how do I know? And I think that mental burden, I don't want to call it a burden, the obligation to think about is their love impact or like the kids. Children aren't a burden, Dahlia. They are the light in our lives, the joy of our day. I need to drink more. So, like, it just naturally falls to the main caregiver, like you say, which again can, and I don't want to keep harping on about working mothers, but it can disadvantage the mother as well because it's hard. It is incredibly hard to run a business or give everything to a job or concentrate when right, I've got to make a packed lunch, I've got to sign the flu consent form. This is like my day today. I've got to make sure she's picked up by someone, sign the flu consent form, get her a packed lunch, has she got a snack? Has she got everything that she needs? Have a paid for drum lessons whilst doing my job and looking after the baby and running the home and and everything else. Like it is a disadvantage. Whereas men, I think, get that luxury to go off to work and not think about home. Do you think that is a luxury, or do you think many people would rather be at home?
I think it's you can only think about it as a luxury if you know about it, if you've experienced it, and a lot of the time a man has never, if the man is the one that's primarily going out to work and working long hours, then they've no experience of having to run a home, if you like, run a family like that. I think that, I mean, I was at the point where I dialed into Leon's parents' evenings quite a few times because there's just no way that I could make it back. I think I only managed to make it to one parents' evening before I started working for Go Traffic full time. That, and that's just the reality of kind of working life.
Yeah.
And you talk about luxury, but you also get to resent it as well. The fact that you can't be involved, that and that's what it comes down to. You can't be a lot of the time. You have to just almost abdicate your responsibility for it, because if you try and be too responsible, you're going to kind of let everyone down on both sides. So I think that sometimes you do step back from it.
I think
not consciously necessarily.
Yeah. Sorry. I think Rachel's made the point before that when you went back to work and she was looking after Leon, she resented you for being at work and you resented her for being at home with the baby.
I think it's quite a common thing, really.
How do we think lockdown is going to change the relationship between fathers and between the partners, like the partners raising the children And I realise as well that we are talking a lot about kind of heteronormative relationships. So like we're talking about fathers at work as opposed to mothers at home. And obviously there are fathers at work and fathers at home. So we'll just say, so like we're talking about the part of the male part that goes out to work. So yeah, how do we think that lockdown is going to affect the relationship between both the care, like both parents and the father and the child? Marisha?
I think it's a strange one, because I think it was actually yourself. I think when we were talking before about newborns and things like that, essentially, because I think there's a lot of impact that we have not thought about yet. And I this is just me, looking in, I guess, really, and seeing what, happens around me, because I don't have children. And, first off, I don't know how I'd be able to fit everything in if I had a child. I could barely look after myself at the best of times, let alone look after somebody else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, there's a lot of impact that we don't know yet. And, that first few months, I guess, of, parent and baby socialization is or isn't happening, or if it is, it's happening in a very different way to what is used to be happening. I think there's going to be huge amounts of separation anxiety and issues that come around there, but we don't know about yet because they've not happened yet, because we don't know where things are going to go and how, what's going to happen, essentially. Because I think we're all just kind of getting through each.
We cut out on my back. Did we cut out? Down my back?
No, I think that's kind of it, really. So I don't know. I think it's taking it back a little bit, I look at my childhood, if you like, and it's only after the event, I guess, that it's like, I'm sure my dad would have liked to have been around a lot more than he was. It's as simple as that. It was more a case he went out, did the work, and provided, that was it. And so other relationships were affected because of that. And now grown-ups and all of that kind of stuff, we have a very different relationship now. So I don't know. I think, it's good for now, but, who's going to see, in a 6 months' time? We don't even know what's happening, at the end of today.
Yeah, no, yeah. It's interesting though, like, I know I'm just moving away from the question that I asked, but when you said about, like, your dad would have liked to have, been with the kids and that, my dad had quite long periods of unemployment after he and my mum split up. And during that time, he really made the effort to spend it with us. Like, he didn't babysit or anything. Like, he didn't, he wouldn't kind of take us for the day, but he would take us, he'd pick us up after school, he'd take us for dinner, he would take us in the summer holidays to Blackpool Pleasure Beach or whatever, and do like some really kind of quality, fun stuff that my mother never got the opportunity to do because she was always working full time. So I think it's quite telling that, as soon as he had that opportunity, he did seem to make the most of it where he could to actually spend time with us. And I think possibly most people would, although I do know of more than one actually, a couple of couples that during lockdown, I know one in particular, both the mother and father work. The mother's got her own business and the father's got, a job, and they had the kids at home during lockdown, and she still had to do all the childcare. She had to kind of put her business to one side and look after these two children all the time, whilst he kind of monopolized one room of the house to conduct his job out of. And I think, and that really is what happens with me and Dave. He goes to work and I look after the baby, or I sort out Naya or whatever, because I think when you've got your own business, it's easier to take that time, isn't it? Sally, what do you think about lockdown then? How do you think that's going to...
So I think it's just picking up on what you just said there. So I think, this is the first time in well, certainly in hundreds of years probably, that the entire population has been forced into being in the same house, in the same kind of sphere together all the time. We've essentially gone back to the time when you know, with everyone working at home, it's like when we had the cottage industries going, and everyone was working, you know, from their front room, or the front room was essentially a workspace. And I think it's bound to change the kind of dynamics of relationships over time as well. I think it's going to shine a light. It's going to become really apparent. You know, you gave an example there of the kind of disparity between the genders and the roles that people do within the household. But it's not as easy to say, now that you're home, you've just got to do all these things that I'm doing, because it takes so long to build up all those habits and those understandings, and the you know, it's not something that you just naturally, you don't walk into a house and kind of learn how to keep it clean. And you know, it takes a while to do when you're younger anyway. And if you've not got those habits, then I could see those causing lots of problems. For me,
sounds like it has, darling.
I'm thinking, well, you do it fucking wrong anyway, so don't even try.
I'm thinking, how much do you have to learn to pick up the fucking Hoover?
No, I would say that for me, because the other thing is that before lockdown, obviously, a Grey Traffic, we got the office, and I was feeling at that point that we'd started to fall back into those roles again. That quite often I was in the office all day. Rachel was coming back to pick Leon, so somebody was here when Leon was coming back from school, but we had other people in the office, so I had to stay there. So we'd fallen back into that role again, where I was getting into the office at 8, half 8, and I was coming back at, you know, 5:30 again, or whatever it was. And
why was it like? Did you guys make a conscious decision then that Rachel would be the one to pick Leon up and you would stay at the office?
I wouldn't say conscious decision, and this is, but you know, Rachel has to. We've got the horses that need sorting out, which Rachel likes to do. She also takes her medication at certain times of the day, so we just naturally fell back into that pattern. And yeah, before lockdown started, I was certainly starting to think that was something that had to be resolved. I didn't want to carry on like that. But during lockdown, I found myself being more involved in things, being proactive in terms of things like housework and helping education with Leon and things. You know, just think, I think a few years ago wouldn't have been in my I don't know. I would have probably done what your friend did, or your friend's partner did, went and locked himself away for all the time, because that was my normal mode of working, and that's slowly been changing over the last couple of years. And I think it's become evident that I'm more, you know, I'm more engaged in the kind of household sphere, if you like, than I was before.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you saying like about kind of learning those skills. And during lockdown, Dave did go and kind of lock himself in the dining room. Didn't lock himself in, but you know, was working kind of very conscientiously whilst I was upstairs doing the homeschooling mainly, and obviously working. And at that time we'd furloughed pretty much everyone, so you know, it was me and Rachel kind of trying to keep the business going whilst we built back up. And Naya, because I was the primary caregiver up to going into furlough, Naya would come to me for pretty much, you know, most things. If she needed help with her work, she'd come to me. If she was bored, she'd come to me. If she, you know, couldn't get the tin opener to work, she'd come to me. So that we kind of fell into that traditional role, even more so, really, I suppose. And now he's still working from home a lot. But now he's back at school. But yeah, the kind of role, the traditional role, does still fall to me. when you say it takes some training to get into it, are you making the point that men go straight into work and so there's no opportunity to learn household management skills?
I think what I meant by that is originally when you first move into your own home, well, I certainly couldn't look after a home when I first moved into one. I didn't have the skills to do it. It took years to figure out how to look after myself, I suppose, in a way, if I'm being honest.
So do you think then that why do you think then that that's a kind of gender specific thing?
I think I was making a point about working dads, really, that those fathers that have been in that role, that routine of being out of the house during the majority of the day, it's often not their responsibility in the way that their relationships are structured to, I don't know, empty the bins or do the hoovering or do the washing up or all those things or be a point of contact to the school or the things that are kind of a woman who's around more naturally does. Absolutely what you just said about things with Naira, I suppose.
But that would be kind of housewives, wouldn't it, and business owners. How do you suppose that translates where both parents work? Or both parents work away at a job rather than having their own business?
You see, I don't have a vast amount of experience of that, if I'm being completely honest.
Rachel did work for like the first 5 years of, like, she went to a job for the first 5 years of Leon's life.
Yes. I'm just trying to think how that worked.
Did you live in squalor? Sorry, I'm just attending to the baby. Did Rachel know how to use the duster?
Careful, she's watching.
how we managed it, because obviously Leon was at nursery, or he was at my parents. We were more equal. I actually think we were probably more equal at the beginning, and that kind of, I certainly think that looking back at it, we cooked more equally. We looked after Leon more equally, and then slowly but surely, as Rachel was working at home, I was working away a lot more. That relationship became more, the inequities of it grew as we kind of found different roles, I suppose. Does that make sense? What do you think?
It's an interesting thing, because I'm listening, I'm thinking, how would I, well, I don't know, but how would I react if that was me, and if things started to change for me in that kind of space, and there's a couple of things, I guess, really, because first off, I think I naturally do fall into that typical house making role, for want of a better term, and I kind of do, and that's because of all different reasons, being a perfectionist and all of that kind of stuff. I laughed about you doing it wrong. That is me, you know what I mean? So I kind of would anyway. But also, I think there's, maybe there's also a lot of assumption sometimes, and if you want some help with something, then sometimes you have to ask, and that doesn't always happen, does it? Like if we're kind of dishing out roles, it could be both ways, that it's not would you help doing that, and vice versa. Sometimes maybe it just comes down to having a conversation, which doesn't happen all the time.
Yes, but you shouldn't have to fucking ask, should you? You shouldn't, like...
both ways.
There's something about the kind of the like a vestige of the Victorian housewife who was always at home, and like women have an expectation that they have put on them or put upon themselves.
I'm sorry, what? Women have put this upon ourselves?
Well, I said both.
This is why men aren't allowed on. Oh.
You think we put this upon ourselves?
Yeah. So, in terms of the way that we are all socialised, do you think that there's do we need to live it in that same kind of way that we? Does it matter if we don't make the bed in the morning, for example?
How have we put this upon ourselves? Just moving away from your disgusting habits. Yes, you need to make your bed in the morning. Why do you think we've brought it upon ourselves?
I don't mean brought it upon. I say, is it a vestige? Is it a hang up? Is it you know? Are some of these things just something that has just like expectations that we've got, that men have got, that women have got about the way that kind of those gender roles work, and some of them can just be quietly forgotten about over time, and it's not actually that important. Some things aren't necessarily that important.
So are you arguing that our mothers and grandmothers have told us that we need to make the bed in the morning, and actually we don't need to make the bed in the morning, and if we would just forget about what our mothers and grandmothers told us to do, then we would all live in a much more equal society?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Go on, in what way? Like, this is really interesting. In what way? Yes.
I would say yes, that some of those things are put up, are handed down by generation to generation, and yeah, some of them, some things that we all do. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I don't know. Tell me why I'm wrong.
I think you are.
I think that's an interesting point though, like, because I kind of get what you're saying really, really quite badly. Is that, like sometimes, it can be something as daft as like my nan and my mum will iron their quilt covers, for example, and I don't, I don't know. That's a very loose term. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of. So I think that's kind of where we're at. But yeah, again, I don't know, where does that expectation come from? Why is it even there? Who decides?
It comes from the patriarchy.
And I'm not saying that it doesn't come from the patriarchy. We live in a patriarchal system, and we also are all social. We also all learn what it means to be a man and a woman. Our gender roles. I'm 39, I'm almost 40, so that's for something that I learned 40 years ago, and the world's massively changed since then. And likewise, so that my parents picked up all their bad habits from 30 years from the 50s and whatever. So it's constantly a generation or two behind where it perhaps should be.
It's a generational hand down of what a role is for a woman and a man. You're right, but I don't think you can say women have done this to themselves in the same way that you can't say that men have done that to themselves, that men need to be macho and men shouldn't have emotions and aren't allowed to express themselves. Men haven't done that to themselves. It's both genders are complicit in formulating gender roles which are damaging to both genders, and true equality will be achieved when boys and girls are raised with the exact same values. That doesn't mean that boys don't cry and girls are good homemakers. Making the bed, ironing your sheets, the actual task itself isn't the issue. It's whose job is it to do the task that then becomes the issue. Like, if you don't want to make your bed, don't make your fucking bed. But if one person, like if it was two women in a relationship and one person didn't want to make the bed and one person wanted to make the bed, that wouldn't become a gender issue. That would just be one of you is grotty and one of you wants to have a nice made bed.
I take your point. I was just trying to make an example, but you're right. It could apply to both genders, of course. And so you're absolutely right to bring up toxic masculinity as well, and the impact that has on men and men's mental health, and you know, and that massively damages the relationships between you know, men and the children as well, I think.
Hugely. I think, like, as damaging as it is to women to have them put in this like homemaking role, which by the way has only really come in since kind of people started, like, since really the Industrial Revolution, and you know, women started living at home and people started earning enough money and they didn't have to till the fields all day. And before that, gender roles are really fairly even. And so until we stop, that disadvantages women in the workplace, and expecting men to go out and work and not look after their children disadvantages men at home. And until it's equal, both genders are fucked and children miss out, and then they become kind of damaged adults. Anyway, we've gone way over. Has anyone got a parting shot that they want to give? Without Rachel,
we need Rachel to say, so how do we fix this? How do we change this?
Tarisha, how do we fix it?
How do we change this? And I always say, well, it starts off with conversation. That's how it rolls, isn't it? But it kind of is a little bit like what, you know, that end, you know, part there was, you know, I guess we have to stand up and say no, you know, no, I'm not doing that, or actually, why don't you do that? And yes, it has to be, you know, explicitly taught, I guess, to the next generation that it doesn't have to be, you know, the woman that cooks and cleans and the man that goes out to work. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. Dali, do you want to like say any final words?
I just think
Before Rachel crucifies you.
I think that I'm optimistic that lockdown is going to have had a positive impact on some of these things. Like you said, we are, you know, we were quite equal before the Industrial Revolution. That did change a lot, and this experience that we've all kind of gone through as a nation, there's still a lot of people working from home, has brought us a bit further back towards where we were before, and I think that must be positive. And I think men, as you know, working dads, you know, will those men that go out primarily and kind of, you know, leave the women to do all the kind of looking after of kids, etc., will probably see have it highlighted some of the things that they've missed out on, and some of the differences between the roles that aren't necessarily as apparent in the here and now, maybe. So I think it'll be a good thing. But I think you're right, Marisha. More conversations, more talking, putting arguments forwards in a probably non-offensive way might be beneficial. Sorry.
I think well, you've been offensive. You've not been offensive.
I didn't think through what I was saying before.
It wasn't offensive. I like the argy-bargy. I hope that lockdown has been positive, because if you don't get to spend that time with your children and see the fun in them, then it is just drudgery, and all you're doing is giving care, and you're not, you know, seeing them grow, taking them to school, enjoying the little, you know, walks up to school, or having the joy of a parent seeing them when they've done well or whatever. It is just hard fucking work and horrible. So I hope that has, you know, at least repaired some relationships between working fathers. So we are totally out of time. Marisha, what are we doing next week?
I don't know.
No, me neither. It'll be something fucking awesome. So join us then, and Rachel will be back. So if you've missed Tales from the Garage or any mention of the Seroptimists, I'm sure she will be back, and her little Blue Peter, hello, will also be back. So yeah, hope you've all enjoyed the week off from the Cringe Factor. Thank you very much for joining us. And Dali, can you just end broadcast, please? Goodbye.
Bye. End broadcast.
End broadcast, Dali.
You got to bring a bit of debate, haven't you?
Yeah.